Okay, I think we're on. Oh, wow. What a team. Guys, welcome to another episode of the No Strings Attached show. Today with me, the infamous duo.
Do you guys want to play Guess the Chip Flavor before we start?
Sour cream.
This is a promotional flavor in Stockholm, and you have to guess the flavor.
Children's tears.
Kilmust.
Good guesses. I don't know what the answer is. They haven't told us, so we'll see.
Fair enough. All right. Yeah. So
good start, boys. Good start.
just by the intro, you can tell that I have Alastair and Zack from the Gray Zone with me. In their typical fashion, we begin another episode of the No Strings Attached, and I encourage you guys check them out because they have unbelievable podcast. Yes,
it's not another episode of No Strings Attached. It's an episode. It's a joint episode of No Strings Attached and the Gray Zone.
Correct.
It's a collab, baby.
It's a collab. It's happening.
Just because you did all the work to set this up doesn't mean you can take credit for it.
Well, I begin the intro, and then you guys, cut me and then say that no, it's that's how
this is the Gray Zone.
Do it. All right, so no, honestly, it's a long-awaited one because we tried to organize one for many days, many weeks, and finally we're here. And I have a separate interview with you guys, obviously on the show. And if you haven't checked them out, please check them out right now because very interesting. I really wanted to kind of make it a roundtable discussion on many topics that might come to our heads, and just to talk in a chill, just your format, more your format than my format, because I think we have a lot of things to talk about today. At least a few important things. What do you guys want to discuss today?
Well, I'll start by saying I can't remember the last time I was the least certified person in a conversation, so that hurts my ego a bit. But at least I'm
the most hair though.
Wait, is this a video pod? No, so yeah. Now, Boggy, thanks for having us, man. Let's get into it. Let's talk some tennis, lads.
Yeah,
it's gonna be fun.
I'm gonna start because it can be a short conversation or a long, depending on your answer. Yeah. As we joked about it before we started recording. So the question is like this. So basically, the lack of court time in the winter for juniors affect junior development in Canada, and a question mark. So obviously, like Zack, you mentioned, the short answer is yes. But I think the more important question is, how do we tackle it? Like, what are the solutions for this? And I know, Zack, you're in Sweden right now, but you're a creative guy. maybe some European things that are happening there that we can apply in Canada.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like you said, you have to be creative, right? I think there's, at the end of the day, if you're already in a program and the courts exist, the courts are there. You might have to be creative with when you use them, whether it's on the weekend, whether it's in the mornings, in the evenings, or whether it's, going to other locations, or if it's finding or, rearranging your schedule so that you can do your strength and conditioning work at another time and then you can do your tennis at a time when the courts are available. So I think, like you said, it comes down to creativity.
Yeah. Al, what do you think?
I think it's tough because I think creativity helps for sure, but there's only so much you can create when your court capacity is over 95% at majority of facilities in the GTA, at least, right? So I think the answer really comes from people who are trying to build and trying to find new sites and trying to create. And I think of like guys like Terry Redverse and Adam Siegel at Tennis Clubs of Canada, and guys like Carl and Andy at your place, who are like constantly seeking new sites to build things and develop things. And now they might not be doing those things for developmental reasons, but the effect of just having more available court time to Canadians will dramatically increase the amount that people and kids and juniors will be able to play. So this goes back to like another conversation, which is like, in Canada, whose responsibility is it? And like, I think you'd start at the top, like, well, it's Tennis Canada's responsibility. I say, well, is it? I mean, sure, their mandate or provincial associations mandate is to grow the game. But if you don't have the finance and you're a not-for-profit in a lot of ways, it's like, well, is it their responsibility? And if it's not theirs, then who is it? And so I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think I can hear what Zack is saying though, because in the last year, maybe more, like we definitely saw a lot more clubs starting like early morning programs. Like I know Granite has their 6 to 8 a.m. for the high performance. We started our 6:30 a.m. program. Ace has had this program for many years, but it kind of forces the clubs to, like Zack was saying, like to, okay, what else can we do for our juniors that need that court time? That are seeking for it, but we cannot maybe give them 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., which is the case for our club. So how do we do it, right? Maybe we host tournaments, which is another thing I wanted to bring up with you guys. Like hosting tournaments became like just tournaments became a big issue in Canada, and a huge hurdle for the development. How do we overcome that, in your opinion?
Could I jump in real quick on this?
Of
so
course.
For the first time in my tennis career over the last year or two, if you're a junior player, it is a greater advantage to you to be growing up in Atlantic Canada than it is to be growing up in Ontario. And I say this because I just came back from a couple of days of checking out the Atlantic Tennis Center program run by our buddy Steve Marr, and they have a bunch of great coaches there.
Shout out to Steve.
They are so not limited in what their players can do. And it's not that their clubs are not busy, because they've got a 14, 16 court facility that's packed all day. But their mandate at their club is like junior stuff and junior development comes first. So they can play, they can train a lot, they can compete in a ton of matches, they can host tournaments whenever they want. They've got a great group of like adults who love training with kids. And so I just think it was just interesting that for the first time in my life, you're better off growing up in Atlantic Canada for tennis than you are in Ontario. And I'm not sure if I like diverged your question there, Boggy D, but
no, it's good. I think it makes perfect sense, because like, if I'm not mistaken, in hockey, the priority of the time of the prime time always goes to juniors, like in high performance juniors, and then adults get like.
Is that right?
I think so. I've heard it somewhere. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. But I heard that, and it would make sense, that they prioritize development of the kids, and then, okay, adults, if you guys want to play, 11 p.m., no problem. Here's the ice for 2 hours if you want, or like 10 p.m. But the prime time goes always to juniors. Obviously, they train early in the morning too. Again, like I would love to see. I have a couple of things like to say, if you don't mind, Zack, like cutting me in front of you, like. But I think clubs need to really understand. Okay, if we're doing the high performance program in our club, it's a certain commitment that we just have to make. I think so. Okay, it's a certain commitment to the players. Again, what kind of commitment? I think it's very important the club understands, what is it that's required of them. And maybe one club can do more than others. That's fine. But they have to realistically look at the situation. Okay, those kids, those 40 kids, whatever, 30, 50 kids, 100 kids, they'll need private lessons, consistent private lessons. Okay, at what time can we fit them all? Can we? No. Okay, so what do we do with that? Can we really host a high performance program then? Okay, so things like this, I think it's important that clubs understand. In terms of tournament, and in general, just like understanding, like, okay, how much do we value junior members? Because I hear a lot about, and I understand that side of the conversation too, that, okay, members complain. I get it. Okay, they're members, they want to play, and at the same time, high performance is one of the most like one of the biggest revenues in the club. Like it's one of the loyal, like most loyal, not biggest, but it's a big chunk of revenue.
Okay.
And it's a very loyal group of kids who spend the most at the club, I would say. Per week, per month, like they're consistently spending a lot of money. So I think the club should kind of pay attention to what they're saying too. Second thing is in terms of tournaments, because I had some time to think about it. I don't know the legal thing
You had some
behind
time
it.
to think on your hour and a half drive to work every day. You had some time to think about it.
Yes, exactly. When I'm not listening to your podcast, guys, I'm focused.
Hey, what a plug! What a plug!
That's it. Check out Gray Zone, guys, on all podcast platforms. By the way, this is non-sponsored.
Sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's good. So, second thing is like courts at Tennis Canada. Like, how come? And again, maybe there's an answer for this, but how come we don't host a tournament there every single weekend when the courts are available? I don't understand. Maybe you guys can. Maybe I don't. I'm not catching something.
No, I hear it.
That's the courts. That's the courts at what's it called these days now? I can't keep track of the name changes.
Sobeys for
now. Is
it
actually?
Yes.
Sobeys for another couple of weeks, then it'll move on back to Aviva or something.
There's a rotation. Like we'll send you the.
Like, that's the courts over there.
Yeah.
And like, what's going on them? If there's not a tournament there,
there's a lot of different programs. I mean, the big thing comes up all the time is they host convocation a lot, and they rent out their facility, like the indoor courts, to York University like exams all the time. So there's conversations about that and like how beneficial that is. And there's a bunch of different programs that are run from there. Like there's a program called Green Means Go that takes a lot of courts, which is sort of a community club based program. And I mean, there's a lot of different things that happen. But I think the big one being like the convocations and whatever, I actually think to support TC on this, I actually think there is something in their agreement with getting the land from York University where they have to host a certain amount of exams or whatever else. Now, I could be wrong on that. Please don't fact check me or anything I say. But that's part of it. Anyway, Zach, back to you.
No, I mean, I was just curious. I mean, I haven't been in Canada for a few years, and I never lived in Toronto, so just good to get the lay of the land. But I mean, yeah, you have to factor all that in if that's potential to tie it all in, like that's potentially a source of revenue that then goes into subsidizing the construction of new facilities, right? So it could actually come all the way back around. And then you can make the argument, well, it's better to have that money, to be able to get that money and then build new facilities which can operate year round, as opposed to just use the courts for this one weekend to run a tournament.
100%.
There's too many details to get into without, or it's too tough to get into without knowing the details. But you can see the different sides of that argument. But it's an interesting one on in terms of the club aspect and the high performance and how does it sit in the club. I agree with you, Bogdan. I think it is a commitment, and I think I think for one, you have to decide, like you said, you have to decide as a club what's your objective, right? Is it to rent out courts and run classes and make people happy and people will get better? Or is it to have you really decided that you have a mission to develop high performance tennis players? Because that is a whole nother endeavor and it requires a commitment, and sometimes it requires a financial commitment, right? But I mean, that's, I think, ideally the operating model is that either you can do a good enough job running the business that you make enough profit off of the court rental and the recreational classes and the adult classes. You make enough profit off of that you can subsidize the high performance program, and therefore you can afford to give up some prime time slots for the juniors, and some you can afford to give up some court time, some revenue generating court time for the high performance players. Or you go the route, which I think is, in my experience anyway, more common in Europe, which is the route of sponsorship, essentially sponsors, sponsors of the club, sponsors of the courts, or sponsors of the teams. You have the Sobeys. Man, they're getting free plugs on this podcast. You're getting the Sobeys team, which is our 4 UA team.
I'm gonna reach out to them.
And then we've got our Aviva team, which is our 4 U14 kids or whatever. And you sponsor the team, and then they throw in some change, and you sponsor the whole high performance project. So I think there's models, there's financial models that can make it work. You do have to be good at your job. You have to be good at running a club, and you have to generate enough profit. But I think it can be done.
Do we have a single club that has sponsors like that, Al, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, Veneto is the only one who's really tried, and they have some sponsors, but I don't think it's like the European model that Zach's suggesting, where it's like tens of thousands of dollars, but it's little bits that help. But we talked about it on one of our pods.
Is it because it doesn't work in Canada, or because nobody tried, or not enough people tried?
I just don't think enough people have tried. Like, certainly there's a tremendous amount of wealth in Canada, right? There's certainly an amount of wealthy people who love tennis, so it should work. I think one of the reasons is, my guess is people here don't have registered not-for-profits that allow for like a tax benefit if you're supporting one of these organizations. So again, going back to the Veneto and Advantage Tennis International thing, they've actually set up a not-for-profit that allows wealthy people to invest and get tax credits for their investment. So it's like, yes, those people are investing because they love tennis, but there is also something in it for them. Now, again, I could be slightly wrong on how that setup has gone, but all it will take is one club in Canada to do it and to do it really well, and then everybody else will sort of follow suit.
That's true.
I think I'll just throw this out there, and we have also mentioned this on another one of our shows. But the other thing that I think is interesting, you asked me at the start, Bogdan, like differences between North America and Europe. And at the end of the day, I'm a tennis coach. I'm not a tennis club operator, so I can't speak to why these differences exist or what the solutions are. But one thing for sure that's noticeable is that I'll only speak for Sweden, but like in Swedish tennis, there is still a club culture, and we have tennis clubs in Canada, but they're not clubs. They're businesses, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But if we think of what the word club actually means, it's like something that you join, something that you're a part of. There's a sense of community. And in Sweden, like every local community has their club, and that doesn't mean that people don't travel outside of those communities to train and stuff. People go but people have their home club, and it's very often where they started to play tennis, and it's very often where the adults are members for years and years and years and years, and they know the juniors who are there, and they know the coaches who are there. And of course, it helps. Also, it's a small country. Sweden is 10 million people, but there's a culture where the club is a part of the community, not just the people, but also the geographical surroundings. And so the companies that are then going to sponsor them might be the local hardware store, the local painting company, or whatever. And so I think that I wonder if that also plays a role in the sense that like companies going in for sponsorships in these situations know that they're going to get a ton of eyeballs on their business because it's local people, and local people who might then might turn into potential customers. I wonder if that plays a role. Like I said, I don't know for sure, but it's a very noticeable difference compared to the North American model, where a club is just a business. You pay them for your lessons, you go there, and then if you get a better deal, you go somewhere else. I'm oversimplifying, but it's not the same personal relationship that you get here.
Going back to your original question, Bogdan, you mentioned something along the lines of like, I mean, the club has to be willing to commit to having a performance program. But I think so much of what we see all over the place now is that clubs will say they're a high performance program when they're really not. Yeah. And we certainly fall in this category as well, because by my definition, it's like if we can't offer a full LTAD amount of training hours for our athletes that are in our HP program, we're not an HP program. If our kids aren't consistently playing matches, they're not competitive players. So I think the definition of like what is a high performance program, what isn't, is really an important thing to consider. And then who is the one that audits that across the country to say like, yes, you have the right to call yourself a high performance program.
I thought about it last night too. Like, is there a way for Tennis Canada to also like certify, the program? This is a Tennis Canada certified high performance program. Is that something they could do, or is that too much?
That doesn't it already exist? I mean, it's not called that anymore, but TDC, right?
The TDC, but it's
was
different.
That, but not. It wasn't real. No, I guess it was. Yeah,
but now it's different.
That's exactly what they were trying to do, though. It was an assessment of your coaching competencies, the tournaments you went to, like it was. Yeah.
But correct me if I'm wrong. But I think it's different now, because the TDC system is completely different. You may not have, I think, the program of certain standard, but still be a TDC. It's not only based on the players you produce. You can host tournaments and you can be TDC, right? Or you can get a certain pillar of funding based on just that.
The old TDC. So for anybody listening that's unfamiliar, so it's called a Tennis Development Center, and this is a program that Tennis Canada launched a while ago, where you were graded gold, silver, or bronze, based on a multitude of factors. One was the certification of your pros. The other was the results of your players over a calendar year. Those are things like how many tournaments you host. So At our peak, I believe there was only 2 gold standard clubs in Canada. One was ORC and one was ACE, but I could be wrong on that as well. Like potentially it's more. But my issue with the TDC thing, as much as that in theory is a great program, it was a program that only coaches were aware of. So it wasn't like you could have put a sticker on your door to say you're a TDC, and a parent would walk by it and be like, what does that mean? It's like if that same program exists or a similar program, but it's actually it's somehow advertised to educate parents on where might be the best place for your youngster who wants to be a professional to go play tennis. To me, that would be very beneficial. Because the other one there's another thing that came out a while ago too, a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic, that was like posters going up everywhere, like is your coach active and certified? And then part of it was like quality standards for kids tennis. But the issue was every club in Toronto had this poster up for quality standards for kids tennis, and 95% of those clubs had no idea what quality standards for kids tennis were. So it's like it's these things that we invest money in that like sound great, but the actual implementation of those things to help people know where they should be is done poorly, in my opinion.
Yeah, interesting, for sure. I mean, this conversation just shows that there's so much work that can be done from everyone's end, starting from us, coaches, for sure.
But this is what's nuts. This is the crazy part, though. Tennis Canada is a gold standard tennis nation rated by the ITF, and for the first time in our history, we held both the Davis Cup and the Billie Jean Cup titles. So, like, for all of the problems we have across this country, we're still finding a way to be like effective, which is awesome. I'm not saying that stop having these conversations, because like, imagine if we solved all of these problems and continue to do the things that we were already doing. It would be like we'd crush even more, man.
But
like,
when
Sweden.
So my question is, like, out of all the players who were on those teams, okay, who won the titles, how many of them went through the system, like from beginning till that's a different story, right?
Yeah, I saw Zack got uncomfortable real quick, so I
But,
we will have an answer. No,
what do you mean by
question.
I don't mean by the system?
Like the club system, like did they? How many people trained abroad? From what age?
I am the system. Sorry.
You're the local celebrity. Sorry, you had your chance to for your headline, but like how many kids trained in a group of 4, in a group of 6, whatever? Till like, do we know? Of course we know, because those are big names, so we can kind of track. But I don't know exact numbers. But it would be interesting to see like how many out of those kids were training in the club in a group of 4 till what age? How many of them left to Florida at what age? How many trained at Tennis Canada to a court with the coach, and the traveling and the opportunities having? So it's almost like unfair to compare. I think at some point it will be not fair to compare these achievements to the system in the club infrastructure that we have. Maybe.
Yeah, that's interesting. I get it.
Because it's almost they were taking out of the system and had their own system at some point.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Now I would argue against that to say like, well, all the other players that didn't have their private system still had to play a role in pushing the development of those players.
And you're right.
But it's a really interesting point you're making.
Yeah, something to think maybe for another podcast.
Yeah.
All right, I think we talked enough about this thing. We can talk more, but there's other things that we...
Al, is it just you or me, or whenever we're involved in a conversation, we just fail to provide answers to questions?
This is like an ongoing thing, right?
But
yeah.
But
I think we took the whole Tennis Canada "it depends" thing to another level.
But hold on, I think that was your tagline. I listened to your podcast the other day. You said like if you came here for answers, you came to for a wrong place. Goddamn
right, Bagadi.
That's it.
Yeah,
I know my material. So moving on.
Right. Oh, okay. Me? Is it me?
I don't know.
Zack, you got one?
If you came here for smooth segues, you came to the wrong place.
There you go.
Okay. I got one for you guys, and this was sent in. Each of us sort of posted, or I guess reposted what you put up, Boggy D, about like, hey, send in questions if you got questions for the pod or the group. And an athlete named Neil Kandai, who's a great guy, super strong player, nice kid. He sent in a couple questions. And I'll read one of them to you now. So just bear with me because I'm dyslexic, so I'll get some of these words wrong. But his question was centered around like players dealing with emotions on court, essentially. And so his question is, in terms of helping athletes deal with stress, anxiety, nerves, whether it's in a tournament or practice, do you think it's important to only give the tools to help cope with those problems in a match, or to figure out why they are feeling this way in the first place? You understand?
Well, really, yeah.
The
I couldn't tell
short-
if you were done. Were you done reading or not?
I think the
That's
short
it.
answer is,
That's it.
well, not that the short answer, but in the beginning, just to deal it in a match, for sure. But the long-term solution, I think it's important that athletes understand, that an athlete understand where it's coming from and how to fix it. If he face or she faces that same emotion, same feeling outside of tennis court, because it's gonna follow you. Like if you don't know how to, that's the goal. Can the coach fix that? Sometimes not, but I think that should be the goal.
I'll jump in if you don't mind. Like, I think, just because I have somewhat strong opinions on this, I think that a lot of harm is done, or a lot of players experience harm through this belief that certain emotions are bad, right? Whether it's frustration, whether it's sadness, stress, anxiety, nervousness, the sentiment that I'm having these feelings and I shouldn't be having them. And then that causes like a second layer of anxiety or stress or frustration that usually impedes performance. I mean, that's the first thing I would say. I would suggest that stress and anxiety and nervousness are completely normal emotions, especially in competitive sport. And so I think that if we talk about, I imagine that the context of this question is around, how to perform at your best. And I would suggest that the best athletes in the world all experience a level of stress or anxiety,
For sure.
right? And so performing at your peak is not so much about eliminating that emotion or that sensation as it is about learning how to work with it and how to handle it, right? Now, of course, there are levels of stress that are debilitating. And if someone's experiencing, far too high at a level that they can't cope and they can't manage things, it's really out of control, then, okay, you maybe look at strategies for how can we reduce this and whatnot. But I think a level of competitive anxiety is completely healthy and normal. And I think it's more interesting and beneficial to look at, rather than getting rid of it, how do I cope with it and work with it?
Great answer. Let's say that it is on the worst end of the spectrum. So it is a debilitating feeling.
Yeah, I mean, then I think you could probably tackle both at the same time. But then it's worth looking into. I mean, if someone's having panic attacks, if someone's, crying on court, if someone's, having real serious negative self-harmful thoughts, then you've got to look into that. And then I think you go see a professional, whether it's a sports psychologist or whether it's a counselor or a therapist or whatever. I think then you have to look into those things. At the same time, you can address it on court and deal with some strategies. But I think there's, one of the things the analogy I like to make is we have physical health and we have physical strength, right? And so you need to be physically healthy before you can do anything else before you can compete in high level sport. You've got to be physically healthy, right? You've got to make sure you're pain free and blah, 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 blah. And then you can look at maximizing your physical strength, right? And the same thing is true for me mentally. You have your mental health and you have your mental strength, right? And you have to be mentally healthy in order to really compete and not experience any harmful effects. But once you're mentally healthy, then you can work on your mental strength. And so I think if we're looking at a mental health issue, then you have to obviously go see a professional, and that has to be treated first and foremost. If we're dealing with a mental strength issue, then you can address that through training and learning to cope with your emotions.
That's always neat categories all the time there, Zach, all the time. What are your thoughts, Bogdan?
Well, like I said, I think it's important to understand, like, what is it like? Again, it's a little broad question, so it's helpful to know like what exactly. But if it's like really on the far end, then for sure, like, I think that's another thing. Coaches need to understand where their expertise ends, because we think that we're, our Lord and Savior, the local celebrities, and we're like, we're all these like almighty people that we want, because we want to help, right? We want to help psychologically, tactically, whatever. Sometimes in their life when they're struggling, but we have to understand our limits. Like, okay, this is like I can't, and that's okay. This is the professional you should see. If you know a good professional, recommend an expert. And that's like, I used to go into these on a physical side. Like, for example, I would see person getting injured and you're probably, and then I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I'm not, why are you commenting like on why is this causing an injury? Like, you're not a physio. You're not, like, what are you doing? Like,
I've been there, man. I've been there.
Shut up. Like, honestly, just like, seriously, just teach a kid a forehand. That's it, for now. But no, for sure. And if an anxiety is just strictly like related to pressure, and like Zack said, you can do something on the court. For example, like, I know in psychiatry, like, for example, if you have phobias or some other fear, well, which is phobia, sorry. Let's say you're afraid of spiders or anything else. Okay, you do it very gradually, and it takes a long time, but you do it super gradually. At first, you might just go in a room, and the person says, "Listen, this is a picture. Turn upside down. It has a spider on it. I'm not gonna turn it up. I'm not going to turn it the other way. Just going to, is it okay? We just talk about other stuff, but it's just there." And then they progressively, develop that into like talking to a spider at some point.
But one day you are the spider.
But why exactly the Spider-Man? Nope. And I think if you do it slowly, again, you take your time. Like Zack said, the priority is always mental health, so mm-hmm. It's more important to make sure that you're healthy on that side before you move on to, oh no, let's play another tournament. Let's do let's chill. Sometimes we just, again, let's relax. Let's take that time off. Let's, take it slowly.
Yeah. I think both interesting answers for sure. And I think to your point, Boggedy, it's like anytime we are training any skill, it's very rare it might be potentially rare that there's going to be a quick fix that fixes everything when it's something that might be a more serious issue. So taking a long-term approach or progressions within the development of that skill or psychology is very important. When I was reading the question, I think it's interesting because it's like that stress and anxiety that a player might be feeling, is that because of internal pressures? And sometimes when it gets on the scale of, it's like they can't deal with it at all. Like, how often is that because of internal pressures or external pressures? And then I think as a coach, we have to be very, very mindful of if there are external pressures, like what are they? And to your point, Boggedy, it's like how much can we help when it's potentially like a coach that's creating the external pressure or a parent that's creating the external pressure. And I think it's important for us to be aware of it, but we also then have to be very skillful about how you might deal with that if that's what you're assessing to be the reason why a player just is totally unequipped to compete.
Yeah. 100%.
I feel like you had something to say there, Zack.
No, I was hesitating. You're good eye. I mean, I think like part of me thinks, I don't know. I guess I just think you have to tackle it from both ends, because part of me thinks that every athlete's going to experience pressure. If you're really a competitive athlete, well, sure, there's going to be internal pressure. There's also going to be external pressure.
For sure.
Whether it's from parents, whether it's from the federation, whether it's from sponsors, whether it's from significant others, like, and we have to, of course, do our job to try and educate people and create a healthy environment, of course. But I think anyone who's invested in this is going to feel some degree of pressure.
100%.
Whether it's internal or external, whether you can have the most well-meaning parents, but I still think you feel like, oh man, like this, my parents have invested a lot. I feel like I need to do well here.
Right.
Like no matter how good the environment is, I think there's always going to be that degree of pressure. And so I think rather than trying to create this, and I'm not saying that that's what you're suggesting, but rather than trying to create this zero pressure environment, I think we can tackle and look to reduce some of the pressure and create the healthiest environment possible. But at the same time, look to say, okay, this is the reality. You're going to you're going to face some pressure. How do you deal with it?
100%. I meant more specifically when it gets to the crippling end of the spectrum.
Sure.
You know what I mean? But
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, fair.
Totally with you. Great.
I've
Finish your
also
stuff, lad.
just the
Finish your stuff.
last thing I want to just say that I think also over the last five years maybe,
Mhm.
I've seen more kids to whom pressure is, doing simple things. They, to them, like playing a tournament, that's just like extreme level of pressure. It's like, what the hell? Yeah. Whereas, for example, like for Novak Djokovic, okay, like for him to feel pressure, I'm assuming, I don't know. Okay. So this is just sheer, speculation. So for him to be in like a semifinal of Wimbledon and maybe being like a two sets to one down, and he's like, okay, now, or maybe not even that. I don't know what goes in his mind. Like he's winning everything. It's like,
Right.
it's crazy, right? So, but because he's been trained, obviously, so he's mature athlete. For today's kids, because the life is so good around them and it keeps getting better because parents are doing more and more and more, again, because of the love and everything. I'm no judgment there, but because life is getting so secure, so safe, so organized, so, anything outside, like taking a bus, for example, like on their own, is pressure.
Yeah, like what you got to do at the start is put the kid in a room with a picture of a bus face down. And sorry, go on.
That would be the logical thing to do, right? That's what you would think. But my point is that they're exposed to less and less, pressure in life. So the only way, one of the only things, one of the only environments they experience pressure is when they go to tennis. So I'm not saying that's not right. This is just the reality that we're going to be dealing with. But I think it also plays a factor that we see more kids having maybe extreme reaction to stress.
Yeah.
And more people in general, more kids in general having, these kind of issues.
So
and it ties in.
Oh, go ahead, Zach, please.
I was just gonna say it ties in with our discussion of tournaments, right? Because if you play one tournament a month, did I get your point?
You got me.
If you play one tournament a month, every 4 weeks you're gonna feel like, man, I haven't done this in forever. This is my chance. This is a big deal. Whereas if you're playing a tournament every weekend, or two tournaments a weekend, you play one starts on Thursday and one starts on Saturday or whatever you play. You can't do that in Canada, but in European countries you can for sure. But like if you're playing matches all the time and they mean something to you, it's a bit like your spider thing. Like over time you get they call it inoculation in sports psychology, right? Like you get acclimated to that feeling of pressure.
Yep. I was gonna throw a statement at you guys where it's like, and I'm curious how you feel about the stuff in Europe, Zach, but my feeling in North America is like we've created a culture of uncompetitive competitive tennis players, and I think a large part of that is to do with people caring so much and putting so much weight on UTR and or their WTN, where like kids in Canada are probably playing less competitive matches than they ever have in the history of at least in the last 20 years. As you get to a certain age where it's way more about protecting your UTR than it is about developing. And then if I was a college coach, what I'd really look at is like, hey, what is a player's UTR? But also like, how many matches has this player played to get this UTR? So if it's like the difference between me taking a 12 UTR who's competed in 20 matches versus an 11 and a half who's competed in like 100 matches that year. I mean, give me the one that wants to compete more. You know what I mean? But I also understand that I'm not being paid the big bucks by an athletic director to make those decisions. So anyway, good luck piggybacking on that one, boys.
Yeah, the whole UTR culture thing is interesting because I don't see that myself here, but of course it could just be the particular kids that I'm lucky enough to work with and the environment that I'm lucky enough to be in. But I do think like one of the things I'm just a record or whatever the saying is, because I just repeat stuff that I've said in earlier shows. But one of the things that's so interesting here is that kids get so many opportunities to compete in different quote unquote leagues. And so like if you're, the most extreme case is if you're 14, if you're a good 14-year-old, you can compete on the Swedish junior circuit in like under 14s. You can compete in Tennis Europe under 14s. You can compete in your club, like inter-club, like league championships under 15s. If you're good enough, you might also be on the under 18 team or the open team. And then you can also play ITFs. And then you can also play open like regional tournaments, prize money tournaments. And so you're looking at like 6 different sort of circuits that you can be in. And each of them offer opportunities to, first of all, feel pressure, but second of all, opportunities to win and feel good about yourself. And so you can lose the final of a tournament on Sunday and then win a different tournament on the next Sunday. And, you know, you have a ranking that's high in this division and a ranking that's low in this division. And like, I feel like it not only does it create so many opportunities to play, but it eliminates a little bit of that pressure of feeling like this is the one match I have to win to get my UTR up, to get my ranking up. It just sort of, evens things out a little bit.
Yeah. Lucky, man. Cool.
Yeah, it's fortunate because I know, like, I don't know what it's like these days in Toronto for competitive opportunities, but I know in the past I've had discussions with coaches and other Canadian coaches and national coaches and talking about how tough it is for 14-year-olds to, like, I'm picking that age, I'm being overly specific, but for a good 14-year-old to get competitive matches, because oftentimes they end up have to play against like 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds to get the right level, and then it's not quite the same feeling, and you don't have any equivalent of Tennis Europe, and you don't have open tournaments to play against adults, and so it's like, you're pretty restricted.
Sure. Yep.
I mean, just like any system, it has the intended way of kind of using the system, because I think UTR is unbelievable. Like everybody else thinks UTR is unreal. It's so accurate. It's crazy. And it's absolutely, like, you must use it. I think if you use it right, then it's great. But if you use it in an evil way, then it's, there's people who are going to be abusing the system, just like the same people who will be traveling to other provinces to pick up points, the same people who, will be, flipping scores and matches, and the same people who, it's like, the same people who look at LTAD and say, okay, so the 10-year-old should be playing 10 hours, 8 to 10 hours. Okay, I'll be playing 14 hours because everybody else will be playing. That's how I'm going to beat them, So it's like, there's going to be always, people who think they're smarter than the system, finding their ways. But at the end, if we do our job, continue doing a job to promote development and to promote, just intended use of this document, of this system, of this ranking, then I think we're going to be having less and less of those people. Hopefully,
hope so.
There always will be. Otherwise, it wouldn't be as fun.
Yep. Okay, Zach.
Did you have other? Are we going in a little round table?
I guess so.
I was curious to hear from you guys how you use video. There's so much talk of like video analysis, and of course everyone's got a phone in their hand, but it can be used in a lot of different ways. And I won't give anything more than that. I guess I'll just open up the floor. But I'm curious to hear how each of you guys uses video in your practice.
I record podcasts.
Good point. I wasn't specific enough.
It's funny, like, because my camera should die like any second too, so that's like a perfect segue.
Come on, Bogdan. I wanted this to be professional.
No. We have to maintain a certain standard. If we go too high, then people will stop listening.
Yeah.
Al, you want to go first?
Oh, sure. Okay, so I'd start by saying I actually talked with Jordan and Ben about this the other day at our club, but like, I think I've completely underutilized video stuff. And I think part of that is like arrogant stuff where it's like, no, I can explain it to them in a way that they'll understand it. And like, maybe they do, but I should just embrace the fact that an athlete seeing something is probably much more impactful than the 87 words that I use to describe something. You know what I mean? But no, overall, it's like, I need to be better at it, because I think it's an unbelievable tool for a variety of reasons that I underutilize, But I'm curious with you guys. So before you guys say how much you use video stuff, are you guys using anything other than just like essentially a phone to record something and then slowing it down in slow-mo? Zach, I know like you've done a lot of stuff with like statistical stuff to do with videos where like you've developed AI programs that tell you the stats of everybody who's played a match.
Sounds like Zack.
Wendell
Sounds like Zack to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess like my definition of using technology might be slightly different than yours.
I didn't know I had done that. That's cool. I'm gonna add that to my resume. Keeping me posted on my own accomplishments. No, but that's why I left the question open-ended, because you immediately went to technical analysis, but video can just as easily be used for tactical analysis and like watching match footage and stuff. Yeah. So that's why I was curious. But I want to hear Bogdan first, and then I'll answer. Or I don't know if I already answered your question, but then I'll talk.
Primarily, I use video to, well, 2 reasons, and both for technical, because we don't have any tournaments in Canada. So I can't use it for match analysis, but on a very rare, like I would say 90%, it's technically to evaluate the person technically. I use kind of like before and after, like I would video forehand, backhand, whatever serve, and then I work on it, and then 2-3 months later, I check it again. Did it get better? Did we accomplish what we agreed on? And also, like, I use it in the moment, because sometimes, like, I ask the person, like, do you feel like your racket is like facing down as opposed to like going up when you're slicing, for example? And the person's like, I don't know, like, I don't know, I don't understand, like what? No, I totally
roast them, Bogdan.
I totally
tell us how shit your players are.
But it's kind of like, yeah, I feel like it's, like I was like, no, you don't. No, yes, I do. One of those. No, I'm talking like no, yeah, I do that. It's like, okay, you do that. Okay, do that again. Okay, and I videotape them, and I'm like, look what's happening here. Unacceptable. And then they're like, oh, and then I earn trust points.
Yep. I thought you were going to give us a dollar amount.
Sometimes they bribe me not to show them the video, so they can continue doing that stuff.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. But of course, but very, very rarely, like I would use it for match, because again, tough to record, like it's different limitations. But I agree with you, Zack.
Well, I'm glad I could contribute at least one interesting question to this, because
you had only one.
I'm like 90% use it for match analysis, and there's a couple reasons, I guess, in both directions. Like, one is that I'd say primarily for me actually is just for gathering match stats, because I'm not going to be charting during a match, because my attention is on the player and supporting them. And
before you go any further, sorry to interrupt, can you please specify the age and the level of players you work with?
It's a wide range, but let's call it 14 to 22-year-olds who are either playing ITF juniors or futures events.
It's really high level, like juniors. Okay.
I mean, it all depends on what your definition is, but that's what I'm doing right now. Yeah. So let's be clear too. I have the luxury of being able to watch my players compete and to be there in person and to travel with them. And so like, I'm fortunate in that sense. So not everyone has that opportunity. And I'm also then therefore lucky to be able to go there and film and set up a camera and all that stuff. So not always possible, especially in indoor bubbles in the winter in Canada. So
can I jump in real quick? Remember your train of thought? But there's actually a new rule, like there's new privacy rules in Canada where we actually can't record matches anymore. So like Ace had to take down all of their camera equipment that they put up.
You're serious?
100%. Yeah. Wow. And apparently it's even something to do with like if both players opt into it being filmed, if the periphery could film anybody that's walking by, something like this, then you can't film it. What? So anyway, sorry. But back to where you were, Zach, but I thought I would mention that.
Oh, we got to unpack that at some point. But
wow.
But so
we'll get back to this.
primarily for match for match stats after the fact. So then also afterwards go into the match video and use Dartfish to tag it, either just generic match stats that I track over time or specific things that we're working on. And so I think I do that because it's because I think it's so impactful and beneficial, and that's the end result, right? Is to see their performance improve in competition. And so I'm looking at that, and I think it's if people have if people have a lack of awareness, like you said, Bogdan, sometimes with what they're doing technically, then there's also that lack of awareness tactically. And so being able to show them on video to say, hey, here's the points that you're losing. Here's what's going on. Here's what happened in this match. And to be able to highlight, these are the things that we're going to work on, and to be able to pull out those specific clips, I think is really impactful. And then on the flip side is that maybe it's a bit like you, Al, maybe it's arrogance, but I just don't think that it's that valuable for the technical stuff. And of course, sometimes it is. And I still I can pull up my phone right here, and I have like videos of players' serves from like yesterday. So of course, there's still little times that I use it, but it's really just pull it up, clip, and then show them something. But I think it's easy to fall into the trap that if I show them the video and I show them a pro and I show them theirs and I do the side by side and I explain, see the difference, see where your elbow is supposed to be, then I've taught them. And it's like, no, they have to feel it in order to actually start doing it and to get better at it. And understanding visually what it should look like is completely different than being able to do it. Otherwise, I'd be able to hit a forehand like Federer. So I think it's more beneficial. Like I'm so cautious to spend so much time, and I also don't want to create, paralysis by analysis. I don't always want them to be thinking about where their body parts are. And I'll look at your knee position and look at this. Of course, there's times when you have to raise awareness of things, but I think a lot of the time I don't want them to be thinking about specific body parts when they're hitting or when they're practicing. I'd rather them feel something and feel like, okay, I understand what this feels like. And then we work on it and develop it that way. So
do you think that showing a visual cue can help expedite getting a player to feel something?
Yeah, I think it can help them understand what it is they have to do. I don't know if it can directly translate to a feeling, but I think it can help them understand what they have to do and get a sort of mental image, which then they can translate onto the court. So yeah, for sure. I'm not saying
I'm gonna push back against it a little bit, because I guess then why would showing a skill be such a prevalent thing that we encourage coaches to do throughout certification in Canada?
Like demonstrating a skill?
Yeah, like demonstrating the ball, demonstrating the skill. So and maybe this is a longer conversation for another time, but I think this is really interesting, because the one thing I like about all this stuff is I think the three of us tend to agree with a vast majority of things that we say, but I find it interesting when there's something that one of us says where I'm not saying it's a disagreement, but when it's like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I've never thought of it like that. Like, to me, those are always the parts that are like really interesting.
Yeah. And like you just brought up the point of coach demoing, and I've never thought of that in connection to the video thing. I'd be tempted to make an argument that the coach demoing doesn't make a huge impact. I don't know. I think it's to the extent that a player can transfer what they're seeing, like that mental image, into an image of how their body works. If you know what I mean?
I get that. And I can't. I have a difficult time debating that. You're right. It's interesting.
You know what I mean, though, because there's a lot of players. There's a lot of players that I bet you there's a ton of players. And we're talking beginners here, but you could demonstrate here. Okay, here, make sure you have a long hitting zone. I'm going to demonstrate it. Long hitting zone, blah, blah, blah. And then you tell them to turn around and go am I right-handed or left-handed? And there's a ton who I bet wouldn't know. I bet beginner level. And so it's clearly they just saw it, but the mental image isn't totally transferring, right? They don't totally, whereas an experienced tennis player will be able to know, because we're picking up on all these cues. We know what to look for. So I think there's value in demoing. This is my initial reflection as you say it, but I think there's value in demoing the things that the player will be able to pick up, the things that the player can already observe and pay attention to. But I think demoing with perfect technique for the sake of hoping that it's going to transfer to the player isn't going to transfer unless they know what to look for.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah, there's something I'm going to Boggy. Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, it's kind of I think if you go to a drawing class, I've never gone, but there's just the first analogy that pops in my head. But let's say you go to a drawing class and you have a picture that everybody's trying to paint. Okay, bouquet of flowers. Okay, and everybody, you get explained. Okay, you got this, or whatever, and everybody's drawing the same thing, and there's not a single the single painting that looks the same.
Yeah.
right? So I think this is where the interpretation of the player happens. Okay, for the first time, let's say they see it's something for the first time. Like that's why I use the drawing class, because I've never done it. So new. So in my mind, okay, I have to do it like this because the teacher, or like, like, for example, this is my brush stroke like this. And then she goes like, oh no, yeah, it actually like a little bit like this. Okay. And then it's kind of like you're finessing that, but you give them like a very rough understanding, like this extension. Okay. You got to extend your arm. You see how I'm extending, like all the way out, all the way out. And then they do it and they're like, oh no, like, like a little bit like this. And through personal work, then, and using tools and everything, you kind of, I think, go to your final image. But I think it forces them to use their imagination and hopefully develop body awareness that will eventually get you the right results. So that's why I think demoing and the visual things, whether it's through video, or I think it's huge.
Can I
for technique too, in my opinion?
Can I jump in real quick? Just as I think about it, the way
Only
I
if
would
you agree with what I said.
I do. It's good. I do. I think, and you made me come up with this. But the more I think about it, Al, I think that like video, video can help bridge the knowing gap, and practice can help bridge the doing gap. In other words, I think video can be especially good for taking someone from unconscious incompetent to conscious incompetent, right? To show them what it is that they can't do and what it is that they should be doing. But I think then the actual practice and helping them feel it is what gets them from conscious incompetent to conscious competent.
Yeah.
I think in some cases, what's that?
I can't argue against that.
Yeah.
And I think in some cases, like Bogdan said, of course, the video can like build body awareness to go like, oh, that's what I was doing. Okay. So and that's not quite the same as pure knowledge, but I think at the end of the day, I think it's very rare for someone to watch a video and then immediately go out and do it perfectly.
Yeah.
Right. They're going to try and do something. And then that's when the feedback process comes in and you use constraints and progressions and so on and so forth.
That's right.
But that's how it is in my practice. I shouldn't suggest that that's the way it has to be done, but that's the way that I use video more.
Interesting. I always love it too. Sometimes we talk, like the initial question was like, how much technology do you use in tennis? And then we go on this rant about other stuff. Like it's kind of cool. I was all connected.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, to piggyback on this one, a couple of years ago at our Tennis Professional Association conference, Robin Menard and Sebastian Leroux gave an hour and a half presentation, 2 hour presentation on essentially this, like, so technical development. For the whole premise was one of their athletes had come back from a Division I scholarship over the summer. And their feeling is their athlete had broken down technically over the summer, but they had this database on their iPad of all of this very strong technical things this player was doing before they went to college. So they gave a whole presentation on like, so essentially we brought up the video, we showed the athlete, like, do you remember this? Do you remember this? And the athlete went, yeah. And according to them, the athlete was able to go out and replicate the technique they previously had. And I thought it was a really interesting discussion. And I think what would be neat is like to bring Simon like into this conversation, because it was a thing that he believed in and said was effective.
Neither one of those people was called Simon, but that's fine.
No, wasn't he? Yeah.
It was Robbie and Seb, I'm assuming. Seb Leroux.
Oh, dang it. It's like the other day.
I know what you think. All French people have the same name, but
yeah. All right. Seb, though, great guy.
Great guy.
Yeah, certified in the Coach 3, that guy.
He wouldn't if you messed up his name back then.
Yeah, he didn't give me it back then either. Shit. So I have another thought, and this might be my last question for the day, but it's related to kind of the video stuff. Where like, let's say we live in a world where all of us as coaches show these videos of technical stuff, and we think that it works or is impactful. Now, I do think there's benefit to it. But I was thinking the other day, and this is going to segue into some decision-making stuff, where, the concept of like, obviously we understand the concept of like a gray zone when it comes to decision-making, right? The name of the podcast.
Hey!
But there's times, and I've thought about this a lot, where like a gray zone at times can be very big. It can be like, there can be a vast difference between the possible outcomes. And sometimes we can, as a coach, we can make a gray zone like much smaller. And then I think sometimes in coach ed, we talk about how important it is to make the gray zone smaller and to challenge the gray zone more. But I sometimes wonder if we do that because we think it is a challenging skill for a coach to do versus if it is the most impactful to having an athlete really own decision-making. And what I mean by that is, how often when a player competes in a match, do they make decision-making errors because the ball was so close to two zones and they were unable to figure it out? And how often is it just that their intent wasn't correct and it had nothing to do with where the ball was? They just made a stupid decision. I'm not sure if I articulated that as well as I would have liked, but maybe one of you can either ask me questions to have me clear it up or just clear it up for me.
I understood it, but only because you've been on this kick for a while with the whole decision-making training and gray zone stuff. So we've already discussed it either off air or on an episode. I can't remember. So I think I know where you're coming from.
Can you clarify for me, like maybe like in a different way?
Zach, do you want to clear it up for me? Because you're quite good at that.
Because I think I get it, but just.
And that's on me. That's not on you. It's like I said it weird. But Zach, bring us home,
I'll do my best. But you're still talking about decision in the context of decision making, right?
And specifically, like the gray zone of what we might feed to, or where one decision happens.
I mean, another. It's a little bit of a sort of Canadian specific context. But I mean, almost everyone who listens to this will be Canadian. But like, if you go through the coach ed you go through the coach ed in Canada, you get trained like, okay, how do we teach players to make decisions? Because you have to make a decision on every shot. Where do you hit? What type of ball do you hit, and so on and so forth. And the way that training for coaches is laid out is like, well, you're going to explain to them in this situation you hit this type of ball, in this situation you hit this type of ball, but then there's going to be this gray zone in the middle where it's not quite sure, is the ball far enough? The typical example is when to hit cross court and when to hit down the line, and the coaches are trained to like challenge that gray zone, to send a ball, to feed a ball that is sort of right on the edge of maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that, to try and challenge the athlete's ability to make the quote unquote right decision. So far, so good, Al?
100%.
And so then Al's point was, or question was, is that useful to like get them to be able to recognize, okay, it's 2 millimeters this way, so I'm going cross, and it's 2 millimeters that way, so I'm going down the line, versus, I think, as you were suggesting, them just feeling confident in, I know the black zone, I know the white zone, these are the ones I hit cross, these are the ones I hit line, and then everything else I hit cross because that's my game style, and then to feel confident and own it, as opposed to trying to find the exact perfect ball to go cross or line on.
I see it. Okay,
was I right on the second half there? Al's looking less convinced.
No, yeah, 100%. I guess I didn't mean I didn't mean for the decision to be black and white, but yeah, otherwise. Yeah.
Okay, I understand the question now. I understand the theory because I did go through certification system. Just for the record, everybody's listening. Shout out to the system, the certification system.
MF's listening like I am the system.
What a plug.
But anyway, I think that it comes down, and I agree with you that the player should feel the moment and not go by, like be robotic about it. I think it's about us coming up with a very clear measurements that will be always right, so to speak, no matter the situation. So I'll give you an example, and I can only give you one example for now.
Let's say you go to a painting class. No, sorry.
Let's say you go to paint a spider. So let's say it's a forehand, when to take a forehand, when to take a backhand. Okay. How do we teach that decision making first?
If it's over here, forehand. If it's over there, backhand.
Right. So it's like we put a marker. It's just strictly geometrical decision making, or like spatial. Like it goes here, it goes there. Like you take this shot. To me, how should a player will know when, let's say, it's getting, but like he's getting the knowledge, he's getting experience. How if eventually a player will know that this should be a forehand, this should be a backhand? What would be in your opinion? What would be like a good call?
If it's a ball they can hit a forehand on.
if they
too
can.
simple.
So, well, I mean, like I'll specify, but I think we kind of agree on this. But if they can run around their backhand and be aggressive enough with their forehand so that it overcomes what they could do otherwise with their backhand.
Yep.
Right. So they're balanced. They're stepping in. So then they have to. It's not about, obviously, it's not about the location of the shot. It's about how physical they are, and how physical they are will always, grow with time. Because they will always evolve with time because they're getting more physical, they're getting stronger. Their opponents might hit like in the middle, but so hard they just don't have enough time. So I think it's also for us to understand, okay, sometimes did it really matter that they hit forehand or backhand, unless they're like we're hopefully their backhand is equally strong. I'm talking like high level ITFs. So to me, it's like, if the decision based on time, do I have enough time to really go like and hit a powerful shot, then they will always be correct. If it's not like certain location or certain whatever, I think, again, I'm not super like.
No, I hear you.
But you know what I mean, because time, this is just unbeatable in my opinion. Maybe you guys can throw like some counters, but to me, like, it's like unbeatable. If you went to run around and you just like you catch yourself like this, bad call. That's bad. That's a judgment call. That's bad judgment. Like you
Right, but then can I jump in on that?
Yeah.
Because I think you're right, but I think the risk you run there is that they might not learn from that bad judgment call, right? Because you run the risk that they're going to perceive some situations really well and other situations not as well. Because I like the idea of keeping it simple in their brain to go like, is your forehand going to be a better shot than your backhand? And if yes, then you run around. And I think that's really good. But like, as you said, there's a whole ton of different variables here. You're looking at the width of the ball, you're looking at the depth of the ball, you're looking at the speed of the ball, you're looking at the height of the ball, like all of these, what angle the ball is coming from, like all of these things play a role in that decision. And some players will pick up on that supernaturally and other players won't. But you could run into a situation where the player makes the right decision 75% of the time, but they always make the wrong decision on slices. They try to run around and then it gets so low and it gets jammed up. And then you can sit there and say, oh, bad judgment. But if they don't realize, like, okay, on the slices, I have to make this decision, or based on the height of the slice, I have to make this decision. So as ever, I'm being like pedantic and nerdy and
the end goal
about it. But
the end goal is still like, can I
absolutely
hurt my opponent with my forehand, right? Can I step
absolutely
in? Can I be balanced? So it's and
For
those
sure.
things are constant. That's kind of my argument to it. Like it's like, no matter the situation, that's your thing. And if you cannot, for example, like, we obviously work for us to get you faster. We work to make sure that you have like how to deal with slices, how to deal with high balls and like all that stuff. But that's always, I understand your point. Like, I know what you're saying. Like, there's more than that. I'm just trying to.
Yeah, no, but I'm
like,
just trying to imagine like,
because that gives also a creativity to the player in a sense that, well, I had a feeling that if I just step in and just drive that backhand instead of running around, I would have more advantage in the point. Because, I steal more time, for example.
Yeah.
So why would I want to run around and like I just boom?
And that gets a bit into the player's identity or a personal playing style as well, linked to decision making, which is interesting.
So I think it gives player more creativity in a way. And for some players, it's good. And for some players who don't like to be maybe super creative, it's not good. But in general, it just, again, this is just something new I'm thinking about. So it's not like I cannot give you like example for the cross court, because there's many variables, like, and sometimes you do have to go down the line on at times when you shouldn't, maybe by the book, right? You feeling hot that day, it's 40 love, like, go, let's try.
Yeah. I guess my overall question, and I could have simplified this, is like,
turns out we've been answering the wrong question for the last 20 minutes.
I sometimes feel like in Coach Ed, we do stuff that's like centered around how to make a situation challenging for a coach, as opposed to making a situation where it's like what's the most beneficial and the easiest for a player to comprehend. But I've been thinking about like different questions like this a lot, and so I thought like you're both coming at it from slightly different perspectives, but it's interesting for sure. And then the big thing overall again is just like, well, like if I'm working with Federer and I'm, let's say, I'm in a situation with Federer, like, do I need to train a gray area that is this big for Roger?
Sorry, he retired.
Or does he not encounter that in a match? You know what I mean? And so, and then at what level does a player not encounter that?
Yeah, I don't think that making the gray zone smaller and smaller is what makes things challenging. I think adding more variables would be what makes things more challenging.
I think so too.
Yeah. So instead of just making a decision based on how wide the ball is, you're also adding in the depth, and then you're also adding in
and that's like
the spin and the positioning of the opponent and so on and so forth.
Yeah, the 4 variables, and then but that's also sort of what Bogdan was getting to as well. Like, well, like the player preference might influence that as well, and then it's like, so there's So the answer I seen from both you guys was like there's so much variability in that I feel like we're all somewhat in agreement to that.
And I think it's a good thing. Like that's what makes this game so beautiful, you know. Like and the goal is, in my opinion, is to eliminate the gray zone.
That's what a lot of our listeners have been saying.
That's funny. Sorry, guys, it's funny for me. No, for sure, because you don't want. But you're you don't want your player to be conscious out there when they're competing. You're like, is that ball in the gray zone or is it not in the gray zone? What am I going to do in this one? You know what I mean? Like, you don't want that. You want players to react, and so it's
You guys remember that research that came out like maybe I don't know 7-8 years ago that basically maybe more that said basically on a junior Grand Slam level and higher, like quarterfinals and up, juniors. Like 60% of mistakes come from decision making, from either the indecision, wrong decision.
Is that actually a stat?
I think so.
If you can find that article, please send it to me, because this would essentially totally debunk what I just said. But I'd be if you can find it.
It sounds dubious, but I'm also very interested to.
But I'd love to. I'd love to see that.
I'll try to find it. But that's something I heard like a while back.
At the end of the day, it's but like very difficult to define what a decision-making error is without knowing what the player was thinking.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's some level of subjectivity in here, but it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah. But no, that's interesting for sure.
And if I find it, I will link it to this video as well, so you guys could see it. Whoever's watching this podcast,
guy using technology just the way Zack wanted, baby.
All right, guys, I think we covered it all for today.
Yeah, tennis world is safe for another day.
Just how we do it.
Yeah, and that's it. So, but listen, I would be down for another one. What do you guys think? If we get more than 10 views, I think the world is telling us something.
Nice. The world give us 11 views, and we'll be right back here, y'all. Right back here. But thanks for making the time to get us all together, Bogdan. I appreciate that.
Guys, thanks for coming, and Zack, especially for you, like being in another time zone, and all your players are winning so much that we could only finally meet.
I canceled one time because my player was in a final. I canceled one time.
And he's the only guy who's been crushing beers on your podcast. So that's pretty good, eh?
All right, guys. Thanks a lot for joining, and I'll see you next time.
Sounds good.
That was the great one.